Maybe it's better for the audio. Let's see if it gets any better. I'm thanking my daughter here who's trying very hard to get, it's much better. Okay, good. Let's go with this. Thank you, Janice, for your suggestion. My sister has heard this presentation so many times, and yet she's out there helping me from Corpus Christi, Texas. Thanks, Janet. Love you. All right, so here we go. So I get a lot of questions about how I figure out things as I travel, like itineraries and deciding where I want to go, what kind of language issues sometimes, how I feel safe. I get lots of questions like that. So for this first event, things are going to be kind of generic. I'm going to give you an idea of the styles of travel, the way and how I decide what the way I want to travel. And one of the reasons that I'm doing this presentation is so I can answer a lot of those questions. So today, here's what I have in mind. This is going to last now about 30 or 40 minutes. We've got a little delay there, so I'll try to speed it up so we're done in time. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way I travel, what I call my travel styles, and then I'm going to give you an idea of some of the places that I have visited. I'm going to talk, and then I'm going to talk briefly about thematic travel, and I've got lots of interesting things to say about that. And as we go along, I may have a story or two to tell. Oh, thanks, Deborah. She likes my sweater. So as you have questions, I'll put them in the comments. Becca's going to monitor them, and she may shout out a question here and there if I don't see the comments as I go along. And I'll try to intersperse the responses. So many of you already know the way that I travel, but here we go. I'm going to elaborate on these a little bit right now, kind of make it easier to understand. And understand the reason that I call it my travel styles and not just my one style. I've broken up down the ways that I travel into these separate styles. And these are, so I travel solo. I'm an independent traveler. I'm a slow traveler. I'm a long-term traveler. I'm a frugal traveler, and my sister will vouch for that. And I'm also a thematic traveler. So I'm going to talk about each one of those things a little bit. And one thing that this does is when I explain it this way, it makes people that are thinking about traveling some of the ways that I do to break it down so that maybe there's one person that's interested in how to save money, but they're not interested in traveling solo. So they would just pick out that budgeting travel style. Or they may want to travel independently, but they're not interested in being gone long months at a time as a long-term traveler. So it's kind of a pick and choose, mix and match kind of thing. So here we go. I'm a solo traveler. And the main advantage I feel like when I travel alone is that I get to decide where I want to go, how long to stay, and when to go. You have all the say-so in your itinerary. And I find for me that when I travel solo, it makes it easier for me to make new friends as I go along. But the nice thing about having a traveling companion is that you have someone to turn to when you have spectacular experiences and go, isn't that wonderful? Wasn't that great? Or get excited about with someone that you're with. And you can also have someone that you can commiserate with when things go badly, and you have someone that can help you troubleshoot or problem solve or help support the whole situation. So there are pros and cons to it. I am an independent traveler, and an easy way to think of independent traveling is that it's the opposite of guided excursions. So, or like all-inclusive packages. So here's kind of what independent travelers like. They like to choose their own destinations based on their own interests. They like to do most or all of their own travel research. We do sometimes hire guides or go on guided excursions, but it's kind of the exception to the rule. Many times we like to travel alone or with just a limited number of like-minded people, so we have more control over what's going on in the travel experience. We love to engage with locals, which is part of the reason we travel independently. It often means staying in one location longer than most guided tours allow, and that way you get to actually get to know people in the local location. And most independent travelers really like to travel off the beaten path. So again, the main thing that independent travelers don't do is join a package tour, or at least not very often. There have been times that I have done so. And in fact, if Abel's still around, Abel Gutierrez in Peru is joined us, and he is was one of my guides. And I had really wanted to go to the the organic coffee and cacao plantations in Peru, but it was a long trip to the other side of the mountains. And if I'd gone on my own, it would have been probably a day-long bus ride. So I joined his expedition. It was just a 2-day expedition to go over, and he introduced us to the organic farmers, and they took us around their farm. And I have a whole couple of blog posts about that excursion. If you ever go to Peru, it's a really nice off-the-beaten tour to do. Because there were, I think on that one, Abel, we had like 5 people in our group that went. And it was very intimate, and it was a great deal of fun. We got to pick coffee beans and cocoa beans, and learn the process that they go through. And so it was great to have a guide for that. So that was an exception to the rule, but it was a thoroughly thought out choice to go on that guided tour and to hire a guide. Are things looking better, Neil? Are you seeing any questions, Becca? Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the fact that I'm a long-term traveler. As many of you know, I was supposed to be gone for 6 months on my last trip, and I was gone for 2 years because I kind of forgot to come home. But so it's obvious that I like long-term travel. And I used to always say, gosh, if I'm going to go to the trouble and expense to travel that far, I want to stay a while. And it's really challenging if you only have a short vacation time to do that in. It also helps to have an income or a large savings account if you're going to be gone for a long time. So this involves a lot of upfront planning and saving. If you have property, it involves, or if you have a commitment at home of some kind, it makes traveling long-term more difficult. But I do know people that have done things like rented their houses out for a year. And in fact, Amy, I don't know if Amy's here, but one time she rented somebody's house out for a year who were gone on a long-term trip. And so it is possible, and a lot of people do it. One thing about long-term travel is you generally stay in one place for a while. For example, I was in Sri Lanka for 3 months. So you can get a little apartment. And in many countries, many of the developing countries, it's a lot cheaper for Americans to live there. I've lived several places where my monthly expenses never exceeded $1,000 US. One thing I do recommend if you're going to travel long term is that you don't try to move around every few days. It kind of goes hand in hand with a slow travel lifestyle, or else you're going to get burnt out pretty quickly. Generally, recommendation for a long-term traveler is to choose fewer places and stay longer at each one. So I'm also a budget traveler. Because I'm on a fixed income, I have to travel frugally. So I pinch pennies like crazy so I don't go into debt. I stay in hostels, I stay in private homes, I stay in no more than 3-star guest houses. I prepare a lot of my own meals, and I've written a whole book about my whole frugal food strategy so that I can have money to do other things with. I learned how to use public transportation instead of local taxis. I walk a lot. As I mentioned earlier, I rarely go on guided excursions because they can cost a lot more money. And I spend a lot of time trying to find the best fares. And this sometimes means that I don't have the best arrival times at a new location. Like the last trip, I arrived in Quito, Ecuador at midnight, and it's 30 miles into town. And I had just gone through 50 hours of travel. The fare was cheap, but it was a challenge. So 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 far, I'm going to talk about thematic travel in a moment, a little bit more. And I'm wondering if there are any other questions about any of those styles of travel. And did you see any questions, Becca? I haven't seen any. And my thought is in the future, I may take each one of those styles and just talk about it in the live broadcast the whole time. So you can get more details about each of those travel styles at that time. So let's see. All right. So one thing I want to talk about is what some of the next Facebook events look like. I'd love to get your input about what you would like to see. And the topics that I choose for the events are mostly going to be depend on you and what you would like to hear. I have lots of things I can talk about. So far, I've only gotten one request, and that was from Starla. So at her request, in the second week in January, I'm going to hold an event about my experiences on the northern route of the Camino de Santiago in 2017. There's going to be several stories that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what it's like day to day on the Camino and how much it costs and how you can plan your own Camino if you're thinking about doing that. And if you go to my website, there's lots of blog posts about the Camino on my website. So I'm going to find out here. I'm going to skip through a whole bunch of slides here. So I'm going to give you an idea of some of the topics that are possible. And anything that you see in my blog post or any of my pages on my website that you are interested in, these are things that I would be able to talk about. But these are the ones here listed. I already talked about, I can talk about how I create an itinerary, which seems like the most question I have, or how do you go about actually deciding how to get from this place to that place? And sometimes I've had several people say, can I just watch over your shoulder while you do all your planning? So that's a topic I could talk about. I can talk about any of these things I just talked about: solo, independent, long-term, budget travel, slow travel. I spent a lot of time staying in hostels in Europe because Europe is a little bit more expensive than traveling in some other countries. And so in order for me to be able to afford to travel in Europe, I had to mostly stay in hostels. But hostels are really interesting because they're not for just 20-somethings anymore. You see a lot of people that are, of our older generation in those hostels these days. And some of the ways that I go about feeding myself is an interesting aspect of my travel, because I save money by buying a lot, preparing a lot of my own food, and then saving the money to go eat the special things when I go out. So I have kind of a whole thing about saving money on food. I can also talk about several travel stories. I have a lot of stories about coincidences, and many of you probably believe, like I do, there's no such thing as coincidences. And there's so many that have happened on my travels that have just blown me completely away. Some of you followed along with Hamish, the traveling scarf, which I can talk about in a minute when I talk about thematic travel. But that was a wonderful experience that I had with him. And I see Kate asked me, which is very interesting, how do you meet locals in a meaningful way? And the whole concept of thematic travel and Hamish, I'm going to talk about in a minute, will help answer that question. And it really is an interesting way to travel so that you do meet locals and become really good friends. I've got friends all over the world now. One of the problems with timing this live event was that there's people that are right now asleep it's in Kyrgyzstan who would like to hear my live event. So I'm going to have to find a way that they can get a chance also to hear the events, because I have these friends that I've made so much by the way that I travel. I could also talk about a lot of my favorite places. I can talk about memorable experiences. Rebecca and I just finished this great COVID road trip, is what we tend to call it. And we could talk about that and how we did some domestic travel now that we're not able to leave the country. And I already talked about food experiences. Okay. Oh, language barriers. Yes, I will answer that question. In fact, Karen asked me that in advance. I do feel shy sometimes, and there are times when I won't ask things or do things because of the language barrier. But I have discovered that one thing is that there's so many people in the world that speak English that it is fairly easy to, when you really need to be able to speak with someone and make them understand, you can usually find someone around that can help interpret if it's really important. I found that slowly as you travel, you learn how to use gestures, you learn how to find out the words that the person, say your guest, your host. I stayed in several guest homestays where the hosts are just, we're staying in their house and they don't speak English. And so you have to talk to them a lot about what you would like to do or ask them questions. And you find out that there's a lot of words that they already understand because they host people all the time, words they understand in English. So you kind of learn how to gravitate towards those words. One thing that I have used, which is wonderful for our generation, is that we have Google Translate, so that if it's something really important, or if you just want to try to just figure out what the word is you need at the time, you can plug it in and do Google Translate. And this is slowly getting better and better and better and better. And we can, we're able to use this, even voice. I've seen people using it as a voice translator, but be careful. I had one experience not too long ago where a friend that I text back and forth, he saw a picture of me and he was in another, he types in his language a remark and he said, "Kathy, it looks like you have gotten fat." And I don't think he meant it rudely, but it was just something that got lost in the translator from Google, because he was using Google to translate the words into English for him. So those kind, I think we had recently another one where we saw something about some dish in Portugal, and it was, they called them ranas, and which is frogs, but it didn't mean ranas. It really meant something else, and we never did figure out what it was supposed to be called. So that was interesting. So you do have to be careful with the Google Translate. But like I said, we'll tell you the story of the snack one day. So that's I don't find it to be hard, but I do agree sometimes I am shy about approaching someone if I know that I can't speak to them in their language. So anyway, so else, let's see. And then, oh, and Amy asked you, do you ever feel shy, overloaded, or scared regarding the language program and problem? And not too much. I guess I think at the beginning of my traveling, I did more than I do now. One thing was most of my earlier trips were in Peru, and I tell people I have enough Spanish to get myself in trouble. But as I started learning my Spanish and using a lot of gestures to get my meaning across between English and Spanish, I think I learned a lot about communicating when someone doesn't speak my language. And then that kind of translated to other places. So, but it's usually you can make, if you're buying something, you can make it known what you're looking for, and you can write things down because numbers are universal almost. Any language uses our number system. So you can write numbers down if you're looking for costs or things like that. So I think you just have to approach it as this is part of the travel experience. So I hope that helped. Oh, Jerry joined me from Ireland. Oh, it is a good evening, Jerry. You're about ready to go to bed, I think. So is Annie out there? Annie was going to join us from England. Haven't seen her comments yet. Let's see. Was there any other questions that we had? Let's see. So they're also for topics that I could talk about in the future. I spent 3 or 4 months, I think, overwintering in Ireland and Scotland. Now, you would think that'd be a little bit crazy. It turned out to be wonderful. And I could talk a lot about using off-season travel to save a lot of money because it was really cheap and there was nobody. I mean, it was really quiet. You could go to a lot of really normally touristy places, and there wouldn't be anybody there. And that was wonderful. I was in Kyrgyzstan for 5 weeks and I went to the World Nomad Games there, which was quite an experience. I worked on an organic farm in Hawaii for 5 weeks. I was 3 months in Sri Lanka, I mentioned earlier. I spent some time in northern India and I was in a yoga retreat there for 8 days, which was challenging and good for me. I have been to Peru 3 times. 2 of those times I was there for 4 months each time. And I could give you really a lot of ideas of places to go to Peru, although I have never been to Machu Picchu. And Abel, I'm going to send me comment in there and give me your website because I want to pass on your information to anybody that's going to Peru so that they contact you as a guide, because Abel was a wonderful guide while I was there in Peru. And he's the one that took me to the cacao and coffee plantations. And of course, like I said, we could talk about that great American road trip that we took, we just come off of. So, like I said, you can go to my website and find out other things that I can do. So you can private message me or text me or email me anytime you want to, and let me know anything that you'd like to hear about. In the meantime, I have the next 2 weeks set up. Next week, I'm real excited because I'm going to talk about thematic travel. And thematic travel involves traveling with the intention of following some passion or interest or hobby that you have. For example, I know that Kate was asking me about how to engage with locals, and this is a great way to engage with locals. I know Kate is a birder. She loves to go bird watching. And so in Kate's case, she might, before she goes someplace, she might find out if there's birding organizations there. And I think she's done this before in some of the places she's gone. And locate those places and those people so that when you get there, you can engage with those people in events in that area, or just find one person that's a birder and go birding with them in their country, because they can tell you all the local birds, and you're going to, check those birds off of that global list that you guys keep. In my example, most of you know, I love to knit and spin yarn. And so what got me to travel in the first place in 2013 is I decided I wanted to go to Peru because I wanted to find out where the alpaca came from that I used in a lot of my knitting. And I wanted to meet the women that were knitting and spinning this yarn. And so my intention when I got there was to go and really look for people who were knitters and spinners. And I had some wonderful experiences because of that. So maybe if you like photography, you would intentionally look for other photographers wherever you go and maybe invite them to go to group shoots with you, or explore some of their experiences with photography and then talk about yours. So, so in the next Facebook event, I'm going to talk about thematic travel, and I'm also going to share some fun news related to that. I've got some new things coming on my website about thematic travel, because I think that thematic travel and traveling with, I had a traveling scarf. Oh, this is where Hamish comes in. Hamish, the traveling scarf, was a scarf that I started with just a little band of ribbing on it. Jerry, you will remember this. Remember when we stuffed Hamish in his bag and you took a video of it? This was in Ireland. But, and what I did was every time I met knitters, I would have them add rows of their own knitting to Hamish. And I'll have pictures of Hamish next week. And when I left Europe, I decided to send Hamish home. He was 6 meters long and had over 200 contributors. Those were all people that I interacted with while I was in Europe with this scarf. And by having this theme that I had, knitting, and I had some crocheters on there as well, and spinners, I met some incredible people and had some incredible experiences just because I had been traveling with something that I was passionate about. So we're going to talk about that next week. So, any more questions? Let's see. Any more questions? Okay, Abel, if you're still there, please be sure to give me your website in the comments. If you've already, if Abel's left, I'll get hold of him later, and I'm going to include this in the comments. And I will at the top of my Facebook page on my personal, above this video that should be recorded there when we're finished, I am going to put some other information about some things that I've talked about, so you can go directly to these websites to find out more information about them. So anything that I've missed out in. So if there's nothing else to talk about right now, I want to thank you guys for joining me. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like it on Facebook, and please share it with your friends and let us know. I'm planning, unless I hear, okay, Bill wants a story. I'll tell one story at the end. Huh? The story? All right. Bill, I'm going to do the story next week. That way you have to come back. I have a lot of stories about thematic traveling. Let's see, any other questions here? And let's see, what else? Oh, so next week I'm going to be at the same time. And then, but if you think that this would be, I should have this at a different time or day, let me know. If I get enough people saying this is not a good time, I'll do it some other time. But next week it'll be the same time, Tuesday afternoon on January the 5th, I believe it is, at 4 o'clock Mountain Time, which is where I am. So that's 5 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock in New York or Eastern Time, and in Peru, I know it's 6 o'clock there. And what is it? It starts at 3 o'clock Pacific Time. So we'll do the same time next week. We'll talk about thematic travel. I have my exciting news for you. Thank you, Rebecca, for helping me. Thank you for all of you that came and asked questions. It's like having a party here in Tucson with all of you guys. And thank you, Janice and Bill, for your help with technical difficulties. We're going to try to get them ironed out for next time. Happy New Year to everybody. I am of a firm belief it's going to be a much better one. And I'm going to now, if I can make it work, leave you with a short video that I made early in my travels. A short video that I made early in my travels. It is some images from the Outer Hebrides in April. So there weren't very many people there, and it's very stark, and it was quite interesting. So again, Happy New Year. I hope to see you next week. Invite your friends.